I'm a 30-year-old man and I've been married to my wife Olivia for a little over 3 years now. We met through mutual friends at a charity run in our city. We ended up walking most of it instead of running, talking the whole time. After that, we grabbed coffee together, and things just naturally built from there. We bonded over our love for hiking, indie films, and both having come from very different types of families. Olivia is close to her family in a way that's hard to explain unless you've seen it up close. They don't just visit every now and then or call once a week. They're constantly involved. Her mother weighs in on everything from what kind of curtains go up in the living room to how often Olivia should call her grandmother. Her father sees himself as a patriarch, though he'd never use that word, and her extended family, let's just say they orbit tightly. I picked up on the energy early. They were never outright rude, just very practiced in being politely distant. Every compliment was backhanded. Every invitation came with unspoken expectations. The first real red flag came at an engagement barbecue they threw for us. I was standing near the grill talking with a few of her cousins when her father walked by with a beer in his hand and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "He's just the stepping stone boyfriend, right?" A few people laughed. Olivia forced a smile and said, "Oh, Dad," like it was just one of his harmless jokes. I laughed too, but something about it stuck with me. I didn't say anything to Olivia that night, but from that moment on I started paying closer attention. Over time I noticed patterns. At family dinners her relatives would talk about Olivia's ex-boyfriend Nathan, like he was still part of their lives. Nathan, the guy who interned with a political lobbyist. Nathan, whose parents owned a yacht. Nathan, who flew to Tokyo for a friend's wedding. I didn't have any of that. I was working as a mechanical engineer with a stable salary, building my savings, and investing in long-term goals. But none of that seemed to register with her family. I remember one dinner where her aunt leaned over and said, "You're sweet." I just thought Olivia would end up with someone a little more polished. I didn't respond. I just gave a tight smile and refilled her wine glass. That night, I bought a small journal from a gas station on the way home and started writing things down. Olivia and I were living in a modest apartment back then, but I had been saving aggressively for a house. When I finally put the full payment down on a 3-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood, I was proud. Olivia cried when we walked through it for the first time. But at our housewarming dinner, her parents walked in, looked around, and her father said, "It's a nice starter home. You'll grow out of it." At another dinner party, while I was clearing plates from the table, I overheard her aunt say, "He'll do until she figures herself out." I didn't interrupt or react. I went back to the kitchen, finished loading the dishwasher, and added the quote to my journal later that night. Her younger sister once joked, half in jest, half in honesty, "I always thought Olivia would end up with someone more commanding." Then she winked at me. It wasn't the words, it was the tone. The same condescending warmth they all carried when talking to me. Still, I kept going. Olivia had always been supportive of me directly, and I didn't want to make her choose. But I never forgot those moments. I logged every snide comment, every slight, every dig they thought was too subtle to matter. I wasn't planning revenge. I was preparing. Quietly, intentionally. On our first wedding anniversary, her family gave her a framed collage of pictures from her past. Most were innocent, birthdays, family trips, college events, but a few included Nathan. One of them was from a Christmas dinner where the two of them sat next to each other, holding glasses of wine, his hand casually resting behind her chair. I didn't bring it up. I didn't ask why. I didn't say a word. I watched her hang it in her study the next day, and when she stepped away I flipped through the pages of my journal again. That night I stayed up late going through real estate listings, investment plans, and private LLC formation guides. I never confronted anyone. I never asked them to stop. I just started planning. I knew that trying to win their respect through conversation was a dead end. If they saw me as a placeholder, fine. One day they'd see how permanent placeholders can be. Not by what I said, but by what I built. About 2 years into our marriage, I signed up for an online robotics course. It was supposed to be a side hobby, something to keep me sharp after work. But it didn't stay that way. I'd finish my shift at the engineering firm, come home, eat dinner with Olivia, and then head straight to the spare room I had turned into a workspace. Wires, sketches, motors, and notes started piling up. I was chasing an idea I had about fixing a repetitive flaw in warehouse conveyor systems, something I had seen over and over at work that no one had solved efficiently yet. Olivia would peek in sometimes with tea, watch me tinker in silence, and then quietly head back to the living room. She never mocked it, never tried to stop me. But she also told me straight that her family would never take it seriously. They already saw my engineering job as safe but uninspiring, as her uncle once phrased it at a barbecue. If they knew I was playing with robots in a spare room, it would just become the next family joke. So I kept it to myself around them. I stopped bringing up work altogether. At family events, I just smiled, asked polite questions, and took mental notes. Every now and then they'd throw another dart. During a Christmas dinner, Olivia's mother whispered just loud enough. She had better options, but love makes people do strange things. I didn't look up. I logged the line in my journal later that night, between a scribbled circuit diagram and a to-do list. The business plan came together in fragments. I sketched the hardware design during lunch breaks, drafted pricing models at midnight, and looped in 2 college friends who now worked in industrial tech. We kept it lean, just 3 people, a shared Google Drive folder and weekly calls. Our prototype worked. Not beautifully at first, but well enough to get a small logistics company interested. We didn't even have a name yet. When I told Olivia about the interest, she smiled and said she was proud, then added, almost in the same breath, just don't expect them to ever understand this. I nodded and kept building. We registered the business under a placeholder name and split our roles. I handled design and operations. One of my friends took logistics. The other focused on client acquisition. Nights blurred into weekends. There were days I'd leave the house before sunrise and come home well after dark. Olivia never complained. She started bringing dinner into the workspace instead of asking me to eat at the table. The first major test came at a family reunion. I had just pulled off a tough delivery for a mid-sized warehouse distributor and barely slept the night before. I showed up late, and her father greeted me in front of everyone with, "There he is, Olivia's nice little husband who's trying something techie now." A few chuckles followed. I smiled, shook hands, and said nothing. Later, Olivia pulled him aside. I didn't hear what was said, but when she came back, her expression was tight. She didn't eat much that day. On the way home, she didn't speak until we were inside. Then she said she was done defending me. I told her she didn't have to. Instead of lashing out, I added another hour to my work schedule. The product needed refinement. The pitch deck needed polish. Within 6 months, we landed a contract big enough to quit scraping by. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. One of our clients recommended us to a European firm who sent over a soft acquisition offer. We declined. It was too early to sell. Too much left to build. A few weeks later, Olivia's birthday rolled around. Her family hosted a dinner, but never told me the time or place. Olivia found out from a cousin's social media post. She went anyway. Stayed for an hour, then walked out before the cake. She came home alone and left her heels in the hallway like she had just walked out of a courtroom. That night, while we cleaned up leftovers from a meal we never shared, she set her wine glass down and said, "I'm tired of being split in half." I looked at her and said, "Then let me take on the weight." She didn't say anything after that, but she sat down beside me, helped me clear the table, and followed me back into the workspace. The journal stayed open on the desk, filled with circuits and insults and quiet plans. None of it needed explaining. 3 months after the birthday dinner Olivia wasn't supposed to attend alone, I restructured the business. Up until then, we had been operating under a standard LLC, split evenly between the 3 co-founders. I contacted a corporate attorney, walked him through the projections, and registered a private holding company with me listed as sole shareholder. I transferred ownership of my portion to the holding corporation, isolating it from outside claims, and gave the business a new legal framework, one built for expansion, not just survival. We got invited to Olivia's cousin's wedding around that same time. Black tie, country estate, formal seating chart, the kind of event where status mattered more than comfort. Olivia and I were placed at the farthest table, next to some kids, a couple of elderly guests, and a few distant relatives I had never met. Her immediate family sat together in the front, arms linked and smiles flashing for the photographer. During the first course, her uncle leaned across the table, picked up his glass, and asked loudly, "Still playing with wires in the garage?" A few people chuckled again. Olivia didn't say anything. Her hand tensed slightly on her fork, but she didn't look up. I excused myself before dessert and went to the parking lot. I waited by the car. She joined me 20 minutes later without saying a word. 2 weeks after the wedding, I got an unexpected email from a retired professor who had attended a private industry demo I helped host months earlier. He had kept my contact and offered a small investment along with strategic mentorship. We had a call that same week. He transferred the funds the next day. We used the money to upgrade tools, lease a modest industrial unit 20 minutes from our apartment, and hire 2 interns. One of them a graduate from a local trade school, the other a self-taught programmer who had never stepped foot in college. They both worked like they had something to prove. Our garage workspace became storage. Everything else moved to the new unit. One evening, Olivia's parents showed up without warning. I was in the middle of loading prototype units into the back of a van when they pulled into the driveway. Her father got out first and looked around. Her mother stepped out, arms crossed. After a short pause, she said, "Still working on side projects, I see." I didn't respond directly. I closed the van, offered them water, and thanked them for stopping by. I went back to work and didn't bring it up again. That night, I logged the interaction in my journal between meeting notes and a supply order. Olivia didn't defend them that time. In fact, she started staying home more. Phone calls from her mother started going to voicemail. Invitations to brunches and shopping trips got declined. It wasn't dramatic, just quiet distance, little by little. One night after dinner, I told her the business was headed for something bigger. I didn't show her numbers or documents, just told her we were close to a moment. A turning point. She nodded and helped me finish packing up another order. The logistics contract came in 2 weeks later. A regional warehouse distributor wanted our systems installed in 4 locations. If it went well, they'd roll us out across 12. I ran the numbers 3 times. If we hit their benchmarks, we'd clear 7 figures before the end of the next fiscal year. We didn't tell anyone, not even close friends. There was another family gathering, a retirement party for one of Olivia's uncles. Backyard buffet, rented chairs, long tables. Olivia sat beside me for 20 minutes before her sister came over, and in a voice loud enough for 3 tables to hear, said, "Still waiting for her real life to start, huh?" Olivia didn't flinch. She stood up, grabbed her bag, and walked straight to the car. I followed. The only sound in the car was the door clicking shut behind me. We drove in silence. That night, I stayed up late. The house was quiet. Olivia had gone to bed, but I was at my desk, finalizing something I'd been working on in pieces for months, a full internal strategy deck titled the Placeholder Plan. It had every milestone, projection, insult, and quote I'd logged. Every step taken because someone assumed I wouldn't take the next one. I uploaded the finished file to a secure server with version control, printed a single hard copy, and sealed it in an envelope. Then I flipped to the last page of my journal, wrote the date in small, clean letters, and closed it, not as an ending, but because the real part was about to begin. After the logistics contract started generating steady income, I met again with our corporate attorney to finalize a company restructuring. The holding corporation I'd formed earlier became the sole owner of the operating business. I kept it airtight, no outside rights, no future stake claims. Every patent, prototype, and process was shifted under the new structure. It wasn't about secrecy, it was about protection. I didn't want future success to be a discussion point in anyone else's household. At the same time, I put in my resignation at the engineering firm. No announcements, just a detailed handover plan spread over 60 days. Olivia didn't know right away. She still thought I was balancing both worlds, clocking in and clocking out. While managing late-night work in the lab, I kept the routine steady so nothing felt abrupt. A few weeks into the transition, Olivia's father asked to meet for lunch. The message came through Olivia, vague, but insistent. We met at a golf club restaurant. He opened with small talk and compliments that didn't land. Then, halfway through the meal, he leaned in and said Olivia might be happier if she reconnected with Nathan. Said Nathan had just returned from Singapore, was more grounded now, and still asked about her sometimes. I didn't flinch. I finished my water, paid the check, and left. Later that night, I logged the moment in my journal beneath a sketch of a new prototype shell design. Olivia found out about the lunch 2 days later. She apologized for it. Not in defense of him, but like someone trying to clean up a mess they didn't make. I told her he could stay in the past. I had already moved on. Our startup began fielding interest from overseas. 2 investors from the Netherlands requested a tour of our industrial unit. We walked them through the systems, handed them tablets with live data, and watched their faces change when they saw the numbers. Negotiations began soon after. The same week, our first patent cleared. It was the automation system I had prototyped in the apartment before we even had office space. I filed 2 more under the holding corporation's name, this time with legal teams handling the documentation instead of me staying up until 2 a.m. doing it myself. We went to a family dinner around then. It was hosted at Olivia's uncle's house. The usual setup, roast, wine, and people waiting for someone else to speak first. I sat through it quietly. Midway through the meal, her aunt turned toward Olivia and said, "I just hope you're not sleepwalking through your best years." Olivia stood up a few minutes later and said she had a migraine. We left without dessert. In the car, she didn't explain. I didn't ask, I just added the quote to the list. 2 days later, a robotics journal published a feature on our company. The piece focused on how we were disrupting outdated warehouse systems using small-scale, adaptable units. The article reached over 100,000 views. I didn't forward it to anyone in Olivia's family. A week later, we received an invite to a cousin's engagement dinner. The card was addressed to Olivia only. No +1, no mention of me. Olivia called her cousin, and after a short conversation, hung up without expression. They kept it intimate, family only, she said, and left it there. That night, I reopened the placeholder plan, the presentation file I had sealed months earlier, and started polishing it. I updated the milestones, added projected revenues, patent listings, press features. I built it like a case file, not a pitch deck. It wasn't meant to impress investors, it was built for something else entirely. I booked a resort in Switzerland under the guise of a getaway. Olivia had never been. I chose the week to align with our rebranding launch, a private event with a few select partners, media, and an unveiling ceremony for our new identity. I didn't mention the second half of the trip to Olivia, just told her to pack light layers and keep her schedule clear. Before we left, I sent one final email to the legal team confirming the corporate name change, Nexus Systems. The placeholder had served its purpose. It was time to stop planning and start showing. The resort in Switzerland sat on a hill above a quiet lake. Snow had just started to collect along the rooftops when we arrived. Olivia thought it was a vacation, a getaway after months of nonstop work. We checked into a private suite with a balcony that overlooked the water. Room service came with champagne, and she slipped into the hotel robe before opening the window. The next morning, I handed her a small badge and told her to dress professionally. She looked at the tag, read her name printed under executive partner, Nexus Systems, and stared for a moment. Then we walked down to the conference wing of the resort. The entry banner read, Nexus Systems, Innovation Beyond Assumption. Inside, soft lighting lit up rows of display tables, interactive prototypes, and a stage framed by hanging LED screens. Engineers, investors, educators, and reporters moved between booths and buffet stations. Olivia followed me past the crowd until we reached the front row of the auditorium. At 10 o'clock sharp, I walked onto the stage and stood under the main banner, From Garage Floor to Global Floor Plan, Meet the Founder of Nexus Systems. Olivia stood against the wall near the exit. When I looked her way, she didn't move, just watched. I gave the keynote address, opening with the challenges of small-scale innovation, then pivoting to the design evolution of our flagship systems. I ended by saying, Some people called me a placeholder. Turns out placeholders can be permanent if they know what they're building. The room went quiet for a second, then came the applause. We spent the next 3 days hosting demos, walking clients through our system architecture, and sitting through interviews. Olivia stayed close by, occasionally asking quiet questions between sessions. At dinner on the last night, she finally asked why I hadn't told her about the scale of it. I told her I wanted her to experience it fully before hearing it from others, that she deserved to experience it without filters or summaries. We flew home with 3 new partnership offers in the pipeline and more media requests than we had slots to fill. The first article about the summit dropped 2 days after we landed. The title featured my name, a photo from the keynote, and a quote about building without validation. Olivia's phone started buzzing that evening. Her cousin forwarded the article with a laughing emoji. Her uncle sent a screenshot asking why no one had mentioned anything. Then her mother followed up with a text calling the event a well-dressed PR stunt. That was the last message. Olivia deleted it and blocked her. I went a step further. I blocked every single member of her family from my phone, email, and every communication platform connected to the company. No exceptions. No warnings. The lines were cut. Later that week, a producer from a major innovation podcast reached out. They wanted a full feature episode on the story of Nexus. We scheduled it for the following Monday. The interview was recorded in one take. Near the end, they asked about my motivation. I said, when someone calls you a placeholder, they expect you to disappear. I just chose not to. The clip got passed around in tech circles. By Friday, we had 3 new partnership inquiries waiting in the inbox. Then one of Olivia's cousins tried to reach us indirectly through a mutual friend, unaware they were also blocked shortly after. They had sent an apology through someone else, asking to talk. I thanked the friend for the heads up, then removed them from my contact list and blocked them too. No one who bridges disrespect gets to stay in my circle. A few days later, a handwritten envelope arrived at the company's front desk. It was from Olivia's father, no return address. The receptionist handed it to me. I didn't read it. I walked to the shredder and dropped it in without breaking stride. Back at the office, the team reviewed press highlights and confirmed manufacturing timelines for the next rollout. A university had reached out asking about Nexus as a case study for their engineering curriculum. An educational nonprofit asked to feature our designs in a summer mentorship program. In the middle of the buzz, I returned to the placeholder plan. The document was still there on the secure server, now outdated. I opened the next draft. The first phase, the part for the world to see, was complete. Now came the personal one, the part they'd never be invited to watch. I bought the building quietly, an old commercial structure on the edge of Olivia's hometown. It had once been a postal sorting hub, then a furniture showroom, but for the last few years it sat vacant. I signed the deal through the foundation trust we had set up after the Switzerland launch, with shared ownership between Olivia and me. No names were broadcast, no press releases, just a transfer, a renovation contract, and 6 months of intense upgrades. The building was stripped, reinforced, and redesigned into the new headquarters of Nexus Systems. The top floor housed our operations team. The second level became a full-scale robotics lab, with testing zones, 3D printing bays, and mechanical design stations. We installed glass walls to let in natural light and left part of the original brick untouched as a reminder of where things began. For the grand opening, we sent out invites to local educators, trade school instructors, nonprofit directors, small business owners, and journalists from nearby tech and community papers. No one from Olivia's family was invited. The morning of the event, people started trickling in slowly. A few of Olivia's former neighbors came, clearly surprised at the scale of the transformation. Most of them didn't speak directly about the family divide, but the compliments were cautious, the kind you give when you're trying to separate someone from their last name. During the welcome speech, I introduced the Nexus Mentorship Program. We'd be offering scholarships, internship tracks, and full lab access to students from under-resourced schools. The program was already funded for 3 years and ready to launch within the semester. Halfway through the event, while guests toured the lab floor, security flagged a guest trying to walk in without a badge. It was Olivia's mother. She stood at the front gates in a formal dress, holding a clutch, acting as if she had simply forgotten to RSVP. Security approached calmly, cross-checked the guest list, and escorted her away with quiet professionalism. Olivia and I were never notified until after the fact. The next day, her mother posted a long message on her social media page, accusing me of dividing the family and isolating Olivia from her roots. The message had passive-aggressive quotes, references to forgotten values, and a closing line about how success was meaningless without family. Olivia replied once. She wrote, "You pushed us away long before he built anything. We just stopped coming back." Then she deleted the app and blocked her mother permanently. We started couples therapy a week later, not because anything was broken, but because we wanted to reinforce what we were building together. It wasn't about communication, it was about direction, what kind of family we wanted to become, and what we were willing to leave behind to do it. Inside the robotics lab, one of the central neural learning modules was named after Olivia's grandmother, the only person in her family who had ever spoken to me with consistent grace and decency. I had a metal plate engraved and placed beside the server bay that read, M. Green Neural Core, Integrity Learns First. A few days after the event, Olivia's father tried publishing a column in a regional paper, criticizing flashy local ventures that manipulate community values for headlines. He never mentioned us by name, but it wasn't hard to read between the lines. The article was rejected. He tried again with another outlet. They passed. The third attempt was worded more aggressively, an attack on corporate egos hiding behind charity. That one was flagged by legal. Our attorney sent a cease and desist letter to his personal address through corporate counsel. We never heard from him again. 1 week later, the entrance to the Nexus headquarters was fitted with a brushed steel plaque. It was positioned just above the glass doors, where every visitor would pass underneath it. It read, "Never underestimate the placeholder." Olivia began solo therapy sessions around the same time. She didn't talk much about them, just kept a small journal beside the bed that she never used before. It was the first time I saw her truly separate her own identity from the version her family had written for her. We didn't gloat. There were no revenge speeches, no posts, no phone calls, just momentum. Daily progress. More students signing up, more orders coming in, educators emailing us to ask about collaboration. The balance had finally shifted. Not because I had taken anything from them, but because I had built something they could never take credit for, never enter, and never undo. A few months after the Nexus headquarters launch, I received an invitation from a national university asking me to deliver a guest lecture on robotics innovation. It was the first time an academic institution had reached out directly, not for sponsorship, not for a demo, but for knowledge. I accepted and requested an open forum format. They booked the largest lecture hall on campus. Olivia came with me. The seats filled quickly. Most of the audience were students, engineering majors, startup hopefuls, tech enthusiasts. Olivia sat in the front row, just off center. I introduced myself simply, walked them through the early designs, the failures, the years of silent work, and the structure behind the holding corporation. When the Q&A opened, a student stood up and asked how I stayed focused when everyone else seemed to doubt the path. I answered without pause. They thought I was temporary. I planned for permanence. The room went quiet before the applause started. 2 weeks later, a major business magazine ran a 6-page feature on Nexus Systems. They focused on our supply chain automation platform, the speed of our product rollout, and the mentorship initiatives we were building. Olivia was named in the article as our strategic advisor and outreach lead. She didn't say much when it published, just read it once and closed the laptop. I bought a lakeside property soon after. Not for optics, not for bragging rights. It was just for space. The house was modern but minimal. One main room for work, one for sleep, a quiet dock at the edge of the water. I told the team it was a retreat center. They knew what it meant. Using company funds, I founded an education trust under Nexus Systems. Its goal was simple: scholarships in robotics and automation for students from underfunded schools. The first round of recipients would be announced that fall. The program was built for kids like the intern we once hired who couldn't afford a laptop but could code entire systems in his head. At a regional tech expo, Nexus was given a center stage booth, and I was asked to close the day's sessions with a presentation. At the end of the keynote, the host thanked Olivia by name and called her the unseen force behind a visible legacy. When we got back to our hotel room that night, she sat on the bed for a long time without speaking. Then the tears came. No sadness, no words, just quiet release. She finally felt like she belonged somewhere that had her name on the door. I hired a researcher to track down the history of Olivia's maternal grandmother, the only person in her family who had treated me with consistent respect. Her story turned out to be remarkable. She had quietly funded other women's college tuition, pushed for educational grants in her church, and built a tiny community library with her own savings. We added her name to the Nexus archive. Around that same time, a museum in Olivia's hometown added my name to a new exhibit titled Pioneers in Applied Robotics. It was a small plaque, but it sat right above a glass case with one of our first production prototypes. Visitors walked past it every day. Olivia changed her last name soon after. No ceremony, no announcement, just updated documents and a quiet signature on the trust ledger. She did it not because she had to, but because she wanted a name that felt like her own. We hosted a black tie fundraiser that winter. Scientists, journalists, foundation leaders, and government advisors filled the room. None of Olivia's family were invited. There were no questions about it, no tension, just the right people in the right place, funding the right work. During the gala, we unveiled our next major project, a digital mentorship platform designed for first-generation engineers. It offered virtual lab simulations, curriculum support, and one-on-one guidance. The platform went live the next day. Back home, Olivia opened a drawer and pulled out the last few heirlooms she'd held onto, a locket, a few printed photos, a faded birthday card. She put them in a box, closed the lid, and left it on the donation pile. No speeches, no second thoughts, just closure. We left for the lakeside retreat the next morning. No music in the car, no conversation, just the road, the quiet hum of tires, and the winter light. When we pulled into the driveway and stepped out, Olivia looked over the water, then back at the house. Neither of us spoke. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. 2 months after the fundraiser, I received a call from the city's mayor. She'd seen the Education Trust launch, read the mentorship platform brief, and asked if I'd be interested in co-designing a youth innovation center, a public-private partnership focused on robotics, engineering, and sustainable tech. It would be the first of its kind in the region. I agreed. The planning began immediately. I invited Olivia to join the advisory board. She accepted without hesitation and took the lead on community outreach, school partnerships, and accessibility frameworks. Over the next several weeks, she met with educators, held listening sessions with students, and worked with designers to make sure the building reflected more than just function. It needed to feel like belonging. At the official launch event, the mayor spoke on stage in front of a packed auditorium of parents, teachers, city leaders, and students. She told the crowd that what we had built was more than a center. It was proof that someone once written off could become the architect of something that lifted others. Then she turned to Olivia and publicly thanked her for being the one who made sure no voice got left out of the plans. 2 days later, a legal envelope arrived at the foundation's mailbox. It was from Olivia's father, bypassing blocked communication by using postal service. The letter was worded formally, referencing health issues, advancing age, and a request for reconciliation before it's too late. I forwarded it to our attorney and marked the original as handled. No contact returned. Olivia saw it later that evening. She read it once, closed it, and set it in the trash. No words, just motion. She never responded. That same week, I greenlit production on a documentary titled From Placeholder to Pioneer. It was an independent project, filmed over 2 years by a small but serious crew who had followed our journey quietly from the earliest prototypes to the museum exhibit, the Education Trust, and now the Innovation Center. We kept editorial control light and let the footage speak for itself. In the middle of finalizing the second phase of the center's curriculum, we received an email at the foundation. It was from a retired high school teacher from Olivia's town. The subject line just said, "About Olivia." The message was short. She deserved better than what they gave her. She always did. Olivia didn't say anything when she read it, but she saved it. We bought another building shortly after, a neglected red brick structure 5 blocks from where Olivia grew up. It had once been a textile warehouse, then a storage unit, then forgotten. We restored the foundation, reinforced the beams, and turned it into a robotics learning lab. The exterior was modernized, but the original walls were left visible. The entrance sign went up a week before the ribbon cutting. Olivia Hall, for every young mind, told they weren't enough. On opening day, dozens of people came, local students, teachers, some of Olivia's former neighbors. They didn't ask questions, just nodded as they walked the halls and took photos beside the plaque. One older man whispered, "It was always in her. They just never saw it," then walked away. A week after the launch, we heard that Olivia's sister had submitted a resume to one of our partner companies, a high-level research firm tied to Nexus through our automation division. Her name reached my desk through a routine board summary. I didn't argue, I didn't escalate. I simply flagged the application and asked the board to review her background. The offer was never extended. The file disappeared from the shortlist. Olivia found out anyway. She didn't make a scene. She sent a final message to her sister before deleting the conversation and blocking her permanently. Then she deleted the conversation and cleared the contact from her phone. We didn't talk about it afterward. There wasn't anything left to say. There was a time when I measured success by who doubted me, by how long I could outlast the noise. But now, watching students solder boards inside a building named after Olivia, reviewing school proposals from teachers who used to ignore her family name, and walking past a museum case with our prototype behind glass, I didn't need revenge. The legacy was already louder than they'd ever been. The federal grant came through in the spring, just over $4 million earmarked for expanding access to robotics education in underserved communities. Half of it was allocated to Nexus Systems to develop mobile learning labs and curriculum toolkits. The rest would fund an internship pipeline connecting rural and low-income students to paid positions in applied engineering. Olivia took charge of the public launch. She coordinated outreach with school boards, visited districts personally, and ran the communications campaign across multiple states. She stood in front of classrooms, gymnasiums, and town halls, delivering the same message in every place. No student should be locked out of innovation because of their zip code. Our 10th wedding anniversary landed a month after the program rollout. We didn't take a trip. No dinner reservations. I handed her a wrapped hardcover book at the retreat house. The title pressed into the leather cover, The Placeholder Plan. Inside were hundreds of pages from my private journal. Every backhanded comment, every financial decision, every sketch, every obstacle, every small win, not edited, just organized and printed, proof that the quiet route doesn't mean a passive one. She read it cover to cover without speaking. When she closed the final page, she looked up and said, "You never fought them, you outran them." That summer, I was invited to speak at an international summit focused on ethical tech development. I delivered a short talk on inclusive automation, and at the end of the conference received the Humanitarian Tech Award for contributions to accessibility in education and engineering fields. Articles circulated fast. Panels followed. Invitations increased. But one thing changed more quietly. Olivia's extended family, the same group once centered in every conversation, had gone socially silent. No more public takes. No interviews. No indirect commentary. Even their old acquaintances now only talked about Nexus. They had faded into irrelevance without a single door slammed. The documentary wrapped that fall. It premiered at a mid-tier film festival, but played to a packed house. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute. Olivia attended as executive producer and spoke during the panel afterward. She didn't mention anyone by name. She just talked about what it cost to choose truth over tradition, and how the return was always worth more than what was lost. At the company's anniversary gala, I introduced my parents during the keynote. They had never asked for credit, never meddled, never compared, just checked in, asked what I needed, and celebrated from a distance. That night, we brought them on stage and presented them with a commemorative plaque engraved with the words, "The steady hands behind the first brick." Back at headquarters, we unveiled a new section in the main hallway. It was a simple installation, shelves filled with prototypes, broken motors, misaligned sensors, and design drafts that had never made it past testing. A sign above the wall read, "Every step they laughed at." While preparing that exhibit, I made a quiet offer on Olivia's childhood home. The place had sat empty for over a year. We bought it through the foundation and began renovations without announcement. Half of it was converted into a tutoring center. The other half remained intact structurally, updated, but recognizable. During one site check, Olivia walked through the halls alone, ran her hand along the old staircase rail, and paused at the top. "It feels different now," she said before turning away. I added one final page to the placeholder plan that night. After finalizing all public documentation and filing it away, no summaries, no reflection, just a closing line, I wasn't the placeholder. I was the blueprint. I placed the printed volume inside a sealed glass display case in the Nexus Systems archive, directly across from the company's first whiteboard sketch. A metal plate underneath the book reads, "Legacy isn't claimed, it's carved." I'm a 25-year-old man, and for most of my life I've had to pretend my family didn't exist, because for all practical purposes they decided I didn't. I was 9 the night I overheard my father talking in the kitchen. He didn't know I was awake. I'd come downstairs to get water and stopped when I heard him say, "I finally found a way to get some peace." He was on the phone, talking numbers, tuition, dorm fees, transportation. At the time I thought he was planning a surprise trip or maybe something for work. But I stood there a while, and when he said my name I stopped breathing. "If he goes there we get our life back," he said. "It'll be quieter. Less stress." An hour later I sat on the couch while my mother folded laundry across the room, and my father pulled up a brochure for a boarding school I'd never heard of. He spoke like it was some opportunity of a lifetime, something special boys were chosen for. He told me I'd grow up faster than other boys, that I'd make friends who'd last forever, that this was how leaders got their start. He showed me photos of dorms and sports teams and neat little rows of bunk beds with polished wood floors. I didn't say anything. I just kept looking at my mother. She wasn't looking back. She kept folding clothes, quiet, her hands moving fast like she was trying to get it over with. Then my father stood up, smoothed the papers, and said one more thing. "If you go, don't expect to come back." I don't remember what I said. I think I just nodded. I remember the couch fabric scratching the back of my knees. I remember my mother's lips pressed together like she was holding something in. But I must have agreed because the next thing I knew, we were driving up to a building that looked like a small castle with ivy growing around the bricks and staff in long coats helping unload suitcases. I never cried. I watched them leave, and I waved even though they didn't roll down the window. Then I turned around and walked inside. I spent that whole first week trying to memorize everything, faces, hallway turns, the smell of the cafeteria, so I wouldn't have to think about what was missing. Every month I wrote letters home. I kept them short at first. What classes I liked, what dorm food I hated, what friends I'd made. I never got anything back. Not once. On my 10th birthday, I made a card out of construction paper. The dorm supervisor let me put it in the outgoing mail bin. 2 weeks later, nothing. I made another one at 11. Nothing. Parent weekends came and went. We had a sign-in list at the reception desk. I used to sneak downstairs during visiting hours just to check, hoping maybe someone got lost or showed up late, but my name never showed up. Some kids had parents who couldn't make it either, but they'd at least call. I never got calls. Once, a doormate let me borrow his phone after I told him I forgot mine. I dialed the home number by memory. A woman picked up. I didn't recognize the voice. When I asked for my dad, she just said he was with his real family now and hung up. I stopped trying after that. At 13, a friend's dad was picking us up from a school trip when he looked at me and asked if I was related to a man with my last name. I nodded. He said, "Oh, I didn't know you were from that family. I work with your father. I saw photos of his baby boy the other day. Congrats." By the way, I didn't say anything. I just looked out the window the rest of the ride. Holidays were the worst. Students who couldn't go home either, stayed with faculty, or got temporarily fostered out for the break. I spent a lot of them in the library or helping janitors clean up after events. One year I asked if I could repaint the supply closet just to have something to do. By 15, I'd stopped asking questions, but I started saving things. Copies of the letters I wrote, report cards, photos. I wasn't sure why yet, but I had this sense I'd need to prove something someday. The counselor once asked if I wanted to list anyone for emergency contact, and I remember just writing none. She didn't question it. I never broke a single rule. I showed up to everything, turned in every assignment, kept my room clean. Not because I wanted praise, because I didn't want to give my father any reason to call this a mistake. At graduation, the headmaster shook my hand and said something about resilience. I smiled for the photo, holding my diploma in one hand. When I got back to my room, I packed up everything into one suitcase. No one came to pick me up. I caught a ride with another student's uncle into the nearest city and booked a bus from there. I remember sitting at the terminal, watching people get picked up. One kid ran straight into his mom's arms, shouting about his grades. Another was FaceTiming his sister, and I just sat there realizing I hadn't heard my father's voice in nearly 5 years. No one had asked why. No one ever did. At 19, I was living in a shared dorm room that smelled like mold and instant noodles. I had 2 campus jobs, dishwasher in the dining hall and front desk assistant at the library. My tuition was covered by scholarships, and everything else came down to hustling hours and praying the discount ramen stayed in stock. I had just enough time for classes, just enough energy to study, and never enough money to waste. One evening, after a shift shelving returns, I opened my laptop and saw a new message on LinkedIn. I hadn't used the platform much, just kept it updated in case a professor wanted to endorse something. The message preview stopped me cold. It was from my father. The subject line read, "Coffee and closure." I didn't click it. I stared at it for a minute, then took a screenshot and saved it in a folder I had created during my first year. I named the folder "Proof He Still Thinks He's the Victim." Then I blocked the account and logged out. That was the end of it, until before the block, when I sent a reply. A few weeks later, I got a handwritten letter in my campus mailbox. The envelope had my full name and dorm address written in neat cursive. No return address. I opened it slowly, already knowing who it would be from. He called me brave for surviving. That was his word, brave. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I failed you." Just brave. He said he wanted to reconnect. He said it might bring peace to both sides. He wrote that my absence had helped the household heal, like I'd been some infection that had to be removed. I brought the letter to the campus mental health office. I didn't know what I wanted from them. Maybe just someone to confirm I wasn't overreacting. The counselor read it twice and asked if I wanted help writing a response. I thought about it for a week. Then I wrote back. It was short. I printed it on one sheet of paper, folded it once, and mailed it from the post office off campus. It said, "Do not contact me again. I am not a chapter in your redemption story." After that, nothing came. No more letters, no phone calls, no surprise visits. I saved his number under Do Not Answer and turned off all notifications from unknown senders. That semester, a friend from my Intro to Ethics class invited me to a dinner at her apartment. It was supposed to be potluck style, mostly students who couldn't afford real food. We sat on cushions and crates around a wobbly table, trading stories about ridiculous professors and stolen laundry. Someone asked if I had family nearby. I hadn't planned to say anything, but I did. I told them the whole thing, from the boarding school to the birthday cards to the phone call with the stranger. No one interrupted. No one tried to explain it away. They just listened. Afterward, my friend walked me back to campus and told me her cousin worked in legal outreach for youth who had been abandoned or displaced. She said she'd connect us. 2 weeks later, I had my first call with the legal mentor. She didn't talk like a lawyer. She asked questions like a teacher. We met twice a month after that, and when she mentioned the intake center she volunteered at, I offered to help. I started by organizing files. Then I helped translate handwritten statements and scanned court documents. It was quiet work, but it filled something. One afternoon, I was sorting a new stack of intake profiles when I saw a child's file. The birth date caught me. 9 years old. The same age I had been when I was dropped off without a promise of return. I kept rereading that number. The child had been placed in temporary care because both parents claimed the situation at home was too tense for growth. That's the exact phrase my father used when he talked about our house being calmer after I left. That night, I opened my own archive, scanned report cards, notes from old counselors, copies of unanswered letters. I started organizing it, labeling each year. I wasn't entirely sure why, but it felt important to have a timeline, not to confront anyone, not to make noise, just to know it existed. One folder became 2, then 4, each filled with dates, emails, scanned forms. I began tracking patterns, phrases that kept appearing in other kids' stories that matched mine. The legal mentor showed me how to anonymize sensitive info so I could help more directly. One morning, after filing a report from a child who'd been placed without ever speaking to a social worker, I sat at my desk and pulled up the intake profile again. The same boy, 9 years old. He had asked, in the intake notes, did I do something wrong? Or did they just stop wanting me? That one line stayed in my head all day. I stared at it on and off for hours. Eventually, I copied it into a separate document. Below it, I wrote my own question from when I was 9. How do I make them take me back? I stared at both questions and added a single line underneath. This cycle ends with me. When I was 22, I got a friend request on a gaming platform I barely used anymore. The username had my last name, same exact spelling, same spacing. I almost dismissed it as coincidence until I saw the profile picture. It was a boy, maybe 9, with dark eyes and a lopsided grin that looked familiar in a way that made my stomach turn. I didn't accept the request. Instead, I made a new account with a throwaway email and used it to view his public posts. There weren't many. A few game clips, a trophy screenshot, and a drawing that stopped me cold. It showed a family of 4. A man, a woman, a baby girl in a pink onesie, and a dog. No fifth figure. No older sibling. No one standing off to the side. Just 4 smiling stick figures holding hands in front of a bright yellow house with a red roof. The boy had labeled them Dad, Mom, me, and Baby. I clicked over to my father's Facebook profile, which I hadn't looked at in years. It was still public. The photos were different now, brighter, edited, curated like some kind of family blog. One image showed the front porch of the house I grew up in, now painted blue with white shutters. Another showed the living room, completely redone, my old bookshelf replaced with a mounted TV. And then I saw it, a post from a few months ago, a family photo captioned, Proud of our firstborn son. 9 years of joy with this guy. My last name was tagged, the same name he'd let vanish into a dorm registry a decade earlier. I didn't sleep that night. I opened my archive, made a new folder, and titled it Erased Doesn't Mean Gone. Then I started writing. I wrote down every date I remembered, every time I had been left off a list, every version of reality that had been published without me in it. The next morning, I scheduled a session through the Alumni Mental Health Fund. They offered free short-term counseling for former students. It was my first time reaching out. I met with a therapist who didn't ask me to explain everything from the beginning. He just asked what brought me in that week. He suggested writing, not a letter to send, just words to get it out. That night, I sat down at my desk, opened a blank document, and wrote a message to my father. It wasn't angry, it was detailed, but I never intended to send it. I reminded him of the day he dropped me off, the cards I sent, the night I called and was told he had a real family now. I described the feeling of standing at a graduation stage with no one in the audience for me. I got to the final line, then I deleted the whole thing. Instead, I opened my contact list and permanently blocked his number. I blocked his email, his social profiles, and routed any legal or indirect contact through my attorney. Then, I called the same legal mentor I'd met through the outreach center and asked her how to file a no-contact order that was preventative, not reactionary, to formally block all contact going forward. It took a week to draft. My attorney delivered it by mail with return receipt requested. It wasn't dramatic, it simply stated that I did not consent to further communication of any kind, including indirect or third-party contact. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about making it real. A month later, I was asked to speak anonymously at a panel for young adults who'd grown up without consistent family support. It was part of a university mental health initiative, and the moderator said I could use only my first name and skip any personal identifiers. I agreed. There were 5 of us. Each of us shared a story, one after the other. Mine wasn't the worst. But when I finished, a few people stayed behind to talk. Most offered thanks. One man waited until the others left, then walked over slowly, holding his phone in both hands. He asked if I had a moment. Then he said he used to know someone by my last name, a man he'd met decades ago in college. He hadn't thought about him in years. But after hearing my story, some details stuck out. He asked if my father had attended a particular university in the early 2000s. I said yes. The man looked stunned. He said he hadn't known my father had kids, but then he paused and corrected himself. He said actually, he remembered once hearing something about a child, only in passing, something vague, something dismissed. But the way my father had said it stuck with him, something about not wanting to be tied down, about not claiming what wasn't part of the plan. He asked if he could send me something he'd found recently, a photo from their college days, annotated in handwriting. I agreed. He said he'd email it. We shook hands and left it there. That night, I opened the folder again, added a new subfolder, labeled it Not a Ghost, Not a Secret. The man from the panel emailed a few days later. The subject line was simple. Photo from college. The message included a scanned image of a group of young men sitting on stone steps outside an old dormitory. They were all laughing, beer bottles in hand, leaning against each other like family. My father was in the center, arms slung over someone's shoulder, grinning wide. At the bottom corner, written in slanted handwriting, were 5 words, cutting ties clean before June. The man followed up later that evening through my public advocacy email. He had more to share, stories from their college years. He said my father used to talk often about how life came too fast, that he'd felt tricked into certain choices. He complained about pressure from his then-girlfriend's family, how they wanted something permanent while he just wanted freedom. One night, during a party, he told the group he might have a kid out there, but brushed it off like a joke, said that if he ever got a clean break he wouldn't look back. That stuck with the man, enough that hearing me speak all those years later brought it back. I thanked him and filed the photo away. Then I opened a tab on my laptop and started searching public court records. Most were sealed. Some were available in fragments, case numbers, filing dates, cryptic status summaries. I searched every variation of my name I could think of, and eventually found something under a trust fund case from the early 2000s. It wasn't straightforward. The language was buried in formal terms, guardian roles, custodial delegation, financial responsibility agreements. But one line stood out: non-custodial party to serve solely as financial trustee. That was it. No visitation rights, no parental obligations beyond tuition and essential expenses. I tracked down the law firm listed in the filings. The office had closed years ago, but a contact page linked me to a retired partner who had once worked on family arrangements. I emailed, explained I was doing personal research, and asked if she remembered the case. She called me back a few days later. She remembered my father clearly, called him articulate, ambitious, and emotionally detached. Said he was very specific. He wanted to fund education but not participate in parenting. No joint holidays, no shared birthdays, just a clean line drawn down the middle of a child's life. He never contested the mother's request for full custody. He just negotiated the trust. The lawyer said she'd rarely seen someone so interested in the logistics of disappearing without technically disappearing. I thanked her for her time, closed the call, and sat with that word logistics, like it was a shipment, like I'd been paperwork. A week later, I emailed the alumni records office at my old boarding school. I requested a full student file, including any counselor or administrative notes. It took a few weeks, but they mailed a thick packet. Most of it was academic, grades, progress reports, housing forms. Then I saw a line scrawled in pen in the counseling section. No emergency contact visits. Guardian is listed as financial trustee only. It was right there, in black and white. No one was ever coming. Not because they got busy, not because of a misunderstanding, because no one was supposed to. I found the name of the counselor who wrote it. After some digging, I learned she'd retired and moved to a small town nearby. I reached out and asked if she remembered me. She replied by mail, sending a handwritten note that asked me to come visit if I was comfortable. She said she had always wondered what became of me. I went the following weekend. Her home was filled with plants and old photographs. She invited me in without asking too many questions and made tea while I looked around the room I'd never been in as a child. She remembered me instantly. Not just my name, specific details. She said I was one of the only kids she never had to chase down. That I always turned in my emotional check-in sheets on time. That I kept my corner tidy. That I never cried. Never asked for anyone. Just went through the motions like someone twice my age. She apologized for not doing more. Said she assumed someone had been taking care of things on the outside. She'd never seen a guardian listed as financial only before. But she didn't question it at the time. I told her she had done enough, that she had documented the truth when it mattered. On the drive home, I pulled over halfway and sat in the car. I opened the envelope with her note again and reread the line about me never asking for anyone, not once. It wasn't neglect by accident. It was a design, a plan, a system where every exit door was already closed before I arrived. That night, I renamed my folder Engineered Silence. When I was 23, I got invited to speak at a small closed-door workshop organized for alumni who had experienced complicated or absent family dynamics. No cameras, no recordings, just people in a circle, trading stories they had carried around for years without places to put them. I didn't think I'd say much, but by the end of the day, I had talked more than I expected. Most people had. There was a woman in her 30s who said her father told his new wife that she had chosen to move out at 16. In truth, she had been kicked out with 2 trash bags of clothes after she refused to call her stepmother mom. Another attendee shared that his family held reunions without telling him, and then told others he was off living his dream alone. There was a pattern to the stories, rewritten facts, missing names, memories shaped into lies that suited the storyteller better than the truth ever could. When it was over, I took the train home and made a decision. I wanted to know what story had been told about me. I didn't need to hear it from my father. I wanted to hear it from someone who had been told the lie and believed it. Through an old classmate from my undergrad years, I got in touch with a man who used to work at the same company as my father. He had left a few years earlier and now ran his own firm, but remembered my father well. We met one morning at a small cafe just off the highway, and after some small talk I asked if he remembered my name ever coming up. He nodded. My father had spoken of a son once or twice, but not with regret or grief. He described me as emotionally unstable and claimed I had begged to be sent to boarding school because I didn't get along with the rest of the family. According to him, the decision had been mutual, me wanting space, them letting go. The coworker believed it. There had never been a hint that anything was off. That version of me didn't exist, but it was the one that survived in other people's minds. I left the cafe, went back to my apartment, and pulled out everything I had saved, scanned letters, archived emails, notes, photos. I opened a new file on my desktop and started building a personal record, a timeline, a detailed archive of every major event that had happened between ages 9 and 18. I layered in report cards, counselor comments, written testimonies from my outreach mentor. I wanted it all in one place, not to publish, not to present, just to own. The next step was my name. I filed the legal paperwork with my attorney to change it fully. First, middle, and last. Not to hide, just to separate. I no longer wanted to carry a name that had been used as a label and then wiped off like chalk on a board. My lawyer processed the change quickly, but during the filing, she noticed that my name was still connected to the original educational trust set up by my father years ago. As soon as the court finalized my new identity, a digital flag was triggered through the trust system, which still listed him as the inactive financial trustee. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from his legal team. They requested mediation, citing unresolved matters stemming from name disassociation and inheritance considerations. It didn't use my new name, just the old one, stamped in black ink like a brand I no longer wore. My lawyer drafted a formal cease and desist. It affirmed my legal right to cut all symbolic and legal ties, routed future communication through her office, and declined mediation on the grounds that no mutual interest remained. She suggested we also file an advance disclaimer, something that would legally reject any inheritance, claim, or posthumous gesture from his estate if he ever passed away. I agreed. We added clauses. No funeral involvement, no name in obituaries, no symbolic gifts. No conditions that could be twisted into sentiment. It wasn't about hate, it was about finality. I signed the document, sent it off, and told myself that was the last paper I would ever need with his name on it. A few weeks passed. One evening I checked my email after work and found a message from an unfamiliar address. The sender's name didn't ring any bells, but the subject line said, "Sorry if this is weird." The message was short, just one sentence. It read, "I think you're my brother. Can I know you?" It was forwarded through a classmate to avoid violating blocked contact. I read it twice, then again. The email signature included the name of a private middle school I recognized. The same one my younger half-brother attended. The sender wasn't him but a classmate. The boy had passed the message through someone else. Somehow he had put together enough pieces to reach out without breaking the rules. I didn't answer. Not yet. I saved the email in a separate folder and stared at it for a while before shutting my laptop and turning off the light. I didn't reply to the message directly. Instead, I started digging. Through the school name and the sender's email signature, I found the staff list and located the guidance counselor's contact info. I introduced myself simply and asked if we could talk. Nothing urgent, just something I needed to confirm. She called me back that afternoon. I told her who I was, and after a short pause, she said she'd been expecting a message like this eventually. She didn't say his name, but I knew we were talking about my younger half-brother. She explained that the boy had started asking questions a few months earlier after overhearing extended relatives mention the other one. He didn't understand what they meant, but the phrase stuck. He'd asked more than once if he had an older brother, but the adults around him always changed the subject. Eventually, he asked the school counselor directly. According to her, he wasn't disruptive, just restless. He was doing fine in classes but seemed easily distracted. He asked questions about family more than other kids did. He wasn't sure what was missing, just that something was. I told her I wasn't looking to insert myself into his life. I had no interest in making things harder for him. But I also didn't want to let the silence turn into something worse. After speaking with my therapist and my attorney, I wrote a short note and asked the counselor to read it aloud to him, once clearly, and only if he asked again. The note was simple, asterisk. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm real. I always was. But some doors stay closed so others don't have to break open. You're not the reason for anything that happened. Along with the note, I sent a short story I'd written years ago but never shared. It was a fictional version of my own life, told from the perspective of a boy sent away with no explanation, who made a life by building his own answers. I told the counselor it was for him to read when he was older, when he was ready to understand something more complex than family silence. A week later she called back. She had read the note to him during a one-on-one session. He listened quietly the entire time. When it was over, he asked to keep the story. She said he cried but didn't seem angry, just thoughtful. She promised to keep watching over him, no matter what came next. That night, I reopened an encrypted archive I hadn't touched in months. Inside were the last emails I'd ever received from my father, the ones before I blocked him, before the legal orders went into effect. I wasn't reading them for closure, I was scanning for patterns. Buried in an attached document sent by his financial consultant, I found something I had missed before. A file labeled Legacy Clarification, Post-Name Change. It was dated a few weeks after my legal identity had changed. The file included consultation notes outlining how to restructure assets and estate plans to exclude one child and focus resources on another. There was no apology, no confusion, just numbers, options, terms like tax-deductible removal and conditional relocation of unclaimed trusts. It wasn't a letter, it was a transaction. I forwarded the file to my attorney, who immediately filed a rejection notice under updated estate exclusion laws. It made my separation from his legal affairs complete, past, present, and future. It ensured I would never be looped into a will, a fund, or an obligation masked as generosity. A few days later, while reviewing one of the scanned case logs, I found a detail I hadn't expected. During an estate inventory meeting, it had been noted that my father kept a locked drawer in his home office. Inside was a single framed photo. The description matched my school portrait from age 9, the last one taken before I left for boarding school. I hadn't seen that photo in years. I didn't even have a copy. There was something off about knowing that the same man who rewrote me out of existence had held onto that one image in secret. He hadn't shown it. He hadn't spoken about it. But he kept it. It didn't change anything. But it complicated the lie. That night I pulled out a journal I had been saving. Not for stories. For something else. I opened to the first blank page and wrote a letter, not to my father but to the boy I had been. The first line was, "You didn't do anything wrong. You were just too easy to erase." I didn't stop writing until the sun came up. At 24, I got an email from a documentary producer working on a project about childhood estrangement and generational silence. They had been given my name by someone from the workshop I'd spoken at the year before. The project wasn't focused on one person's story. It was a collection of anonymous voices stitched together, each one highlighting the invisible space some children grow up in. They weren't asking for my story. They were asking if I'd help tell theirs. A few days later, I received a set of anonymized transcripts. Some were only a few paragraphs long. Others read like diary entries. One of them mirrored mine so closely it felt like reading a script pulled from my own memories. A child put on a plane without explanation. Birthday gifts mailed to a house that never replied. A name changed quietly in the background. The producers asked if I'd narrate. No face, no name, just a voice. I agreed. Not because I wanted to hear myself in it, but because I knew the silence those kids were describing. It was the same one I'd lived in. In the sound booth, they handed me the monologue they wanted recorded last. It was about invisible children, how they're not always missing, just misplaced. I started reading. Halfway through, my voice cracked and I had to pause. The director leaned over and offered to cut that take, to try it again clean. I told them to leave it. That was the point. Not everything needs polishing. The documentary didn't go viral. It wasn't that kind of film, but it found its people. They screened it at university events, community centers, small advocacy groups. It kept coming back to me in small ways. An email, a note, a forwarded link from someone who recognized a sentence that stayed with them. One night, I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from since I was 16, a former classmate from boarding school. We were never close, but he remembered me. He had watched the documentary at a youth support conference where he was volunteering. He wrote that he recognized the voice right away, not because of what I said, but how I said it. He told me he always wondered why I never got mail, why no one ever visited. He thanked me for saying what he never knew how to say for himself. That message led to an official invitation from the alumni outreach team, a closed-door alumni event hosted by the school for professionals who had grown up with absent or estranged family. The focus wasn't therapy, it was policy. How to change systems that overlook students who don't fit into the traditional family structure. I agreed to go. During the panel Kunda, an older woman in the back raised her hand and asked to speak privately after. When we stepped aside, she introduced herself as a retired administrator from my boarding school. She hadn't recognized my face, but the details in my story had brought it back. She had reviewed my file years ago, one of the few students listed with no emergency contact and a financial-only guardian. She apologized. Not with excuses, just with clarity. She said she'd thought about my case more times than she could count, but never knew what to do beyond writing a note in a folder. That folder was mine. I thanked her, then asked if the school had ever considered creating a blind reporting system, something that allowed faculty to flag concerns about students without consistent adult presence, even if there was no immediate danger. Just a quiet system, not for punishment, but support. She nodded, then said she'd bring it to the board. She still had influence there. 1 month later, I received a message from the alumni office. The school board had unanimously approved the implementation of a student flag system for cases like mine. Anonymous alerts, monitored by the wellness team, now allowed teachers and staff to quietly raise their hand when a student seemed to be falling through the cracks. The policy went into effect that fall. That evening, I sat at my desk and opened the encrypted archive one more time. The final file left was a scan of the photograph my father had kept in his drawer, the one of me at 9, wearing a blazer too big for my shoulders. I looked at it for a while, then I pressed delete. No hesitation, no drama. I closed the archive. I didn't back anything up. I didn't rename the folder. I just shut it all down. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like clearing space for something else. A few months after the documentary was released, I got a call from my attorney. She had received a formal notice. My father had died of a sudden heart attack. No advance warning. No long illness. Just a line drawn under the life of someone who had stepped out of mine years ago. The death itself didn't change anything for me legally. The no-contact paperwork was still valid even after his passing. But what followed wasn't clean. His wife had filed a petition with the probate court, asking for a final letter to be delivered to me. She claimed it offered closure. That it was meant to be read by his son, even though I was never called by name in her statement. I wasn't obligated to accept anything, but I asked my lawyer to request a scanned copy, not out of interest, but to make sure nothing could be twisted into a public statement later. She forwarded the file to me in a sealed email, and I read it once, slowly. The letter started vague, some mention of regret, some words about being young and unprepared. Then it turned into a long defense. He wrote that sending me away was a sacrifice made to keep peace in the household, that the calm that followed was proof it had worked. He framed the silence not as cruelty, but as necessary quiet. There was no apology, just justification. The final paragraph asked me to look after my younger half-brother. He said I was stronger than he ever was. It wasn't a request made with care. It read like a task, like he was passing off responsibility. I didn't respond. I deleted the file and instructed my lawyer to have the original letter destroyed. No copies, no record. The court had already honored the no-contact history, so there was nothing left to sort. I didn't attend any service, and none of his family reached out again. A week later, we received the estate documentation. He had left behind a moderate sum, most of it designated to his wife and 2 children. I wasn't mentioned. Not in the will, not in a footnote, not even in the acknowledgement of previous dependents. It was a complete erasure. My therapist later told me that sometimes what you don't receive speaks louder than what you do. That omission is its own kind of message. The school counselor of my younger half-brother reached out a few days later. She said the boy had learned of his father's death, and after sitting quietly through the announcement, asked one question: does this mean he'll come now? She wasn't pushing me, she just thought I should know. I thanked her and wrote back with a message she could pass along, word for word: let him have space to grieve for his father, not the version I knew. Attached to the email, I sent her a list of books, films, and stories. Not about grief, about clarity. Things that help name feelings without giving them a script. She agreed to keep them until he was ready. Later that month, I attended a grief retreat. Not because I needed comfort about my father's death, but because I needed to understand what people do when emotional closure isn't possible. The group was made up of adults estranged from parents who had passed away without reconciliation. Some had walked away by choice. Others had been pushed out quietly, like me. There were no breakthroughs, no dramatic speeches, just people telling the truth for the first time to someone who wouldn't flinch. One man talked about finding out his mother had changed her emergency contact to her dog walker. Another woman described receiving a condolence card from someone who didn't know she had been disowned. When it was my turn, I told the whole thing. Not just the facts, boarding school, the letter, the will, but the small details. The way silence was dressed up as peace. The way lies were folded into daily life like linens in a drawer. No one opened. No one tried to explain it away. No one asked if I had ever tried to reach out again. Someone across the circle nodded, and when the session ended, she came over and hugged me. She whispered into my shoulder, "You weren't broken. You were just abandoned early." I didn't write anything down that night, but when I got home, I folded the grief pamphlet from the retreat and slid it into the back of the journal. I'd started months earlier, the one addressed to the boy I used to be, the one who never asked questions because he already knew the answers. A year after the letter and the will and the retreat, I finished a manuscript. It wasn't meant for bookstores or interviews or panel discussions. I wrote it in long, steady pieces, mostly in the evenings after work. It was for someone who doesn't exist yet, a child I might have one day, someone who might someday ask not just who I am but what shaped me. I didn't try to make it poetic or teach lessons. I told it as plainly as it happened. The last chapter was titled "I Didn't Return, I Rebuilt." With the savings I'd quietly set aside over the last few years, I bought a small plot of land outside the college town where I'd once stacked library books and skipped dinners. The land wasn't large, but it backed into woods and sat far from any main roads. I started building a cabin there. One room, tall ceilings, a desk under the window. I worked on it by hand, slow but steady. Weekends, evenings, days off. A friend from the advocacy group helped frame the walls. A local carpenter showed me how to insulate. Inside, I kept the space mostly bare. But on the back wall, above the window, I mounted one document in a black frame, the acceptance letter to the boarding school I was sent to at 9. Not to romanticize it, not to forgive it, just to remind myself where the real story started. Not at the moment of being chosen, but at the moment of being erased. That fall, at an education advocacy event, a college student asked me during a kendo what I would say now to the boy I had been, the one packing a bag he didn't choose. I answered without preparing anything, "You weren't too much. You were too brave for people who weren't ready." Later that year, I worked with a legal advisor to create a small scholarship fund. Nothing massive, just enough to cover supplies, housing stipends, or emergency aid for boys placed in residential programs without active family backing. I made one request: no name attached, no credits, no dedication plaque. Only one clause built into the fund: no child admitted under silence should be left unseen. Through a friend, I got in touch with a counselor now heading a nonprofit outreach center for at-risk youth. She remembered me from the retreat. We talked a few times, and I offered to mentor one boy each year. Not as a savior, not as a model, just as someone who could show up. The first call I took was with a teenager who had been kicked out after an argument with his father about grades. His social worker said he had stopped speaking much in group sessions. During our first conversation, he opened with, "My dad said I ruined everything." I told him, "Mine said I didn't belong. Let's find out who was wrong." We kept talking after that, once a week, sometimes more. I never gave advice unless he asked. Mostly I listened, then told him what I wish someone had told me. There are people who won't claim you, and people who will still see you. Your job is to stay visible long enough to find them. For my own closure, I wrote one more letter. This one wasn't for the courts or a counselor or a child. It was to the man who raised me in absence. I didn't sign it. I didn't mail it. I folded the letter and buried it behind the cabin. Beneath a flat stone, I engraved with one word: enough. On the anniversary of finishing the cabin, I invited a few friends over for a small fire in the clearing, the kind who knew the story without needing every detail. I read aloud a new piece I'd been working on, not from the manuscript, but something newer, lighter. The final line read, "He told me not to come back." So I didn't. But I built something worth arriving to. They didn't clap. They just sat quietly, watching the fire settle into embers. One of them reached forward and threw another log on the flames. No one said anything for a while. We didn't have to. There was nothing left to explain.